Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, my friends, as Trump likes to tell us, he's getting tired of winning. Winning. As you've probably heard by now, the Trump-backed candidates in these 2026 midterm primary season, they have won in remarkably consistent fashion. The latest metaphorical casualty of this primary season is Thomas Massie, who lost to the candidate that Trump endorsed in Kentucky by about 10 points. So there's other victory news on the political front for Trump. It is remarkable to me how these establishment Republican types still refuse to acknowledge, admit, recognize, understand, whatever, that they are, well, that Trump is the political force that he is today. So I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about, as we approach America's 250th birthday, which, by the way, is just about, 5-6 weeks away, something like that. July 4th, here, 2026, 250 years ago. That's a news flash, not to you, of course, but to many Americans today. In fact, I've listened to the man on the street interviews who somehow find these people who have gone through often the public education system, who think that America was founded in 1914 when we fought to get our freedom from the nation of Poland, for example. It is crazy what some of these people think. But nonetheless, my friends, that is not what happened. We fought, of course, to free ourselves from the tyranny of the British back in, well, we won that victory in the 1770s, early 1780s, become our own nation, declared that independence July 4th, 1776, to kick off the American Revolutionary War. And there are Katy, who's a journalist, make-believe journalist at MSNBC, I believe. Yeah, it is MSNBC. She's the one that I was supposed to join at Purdue University for a segment a few years ago. But it got preempted by a hurricane. A hurricane hit the Florida Panhandle. Anyway, she's out here asking questions. I don't think she's read the Declaration of Independence, or she didn't understand the words, or she has such a mental block on what the Declaration of Independence actually is that she cannot admit that in that declaration there is a line. There's a lot of lines that they don't like, but there's one line in particular that says that we have been endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And it is remarkable the lengths to which these people go. So I want to talk about that as well, my friends. So that's where we're headed today. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get rocking and rolling too far, though, my friends, let's talk about something important. That's your money. You worked hard for it, but is it working hard for what you believe in? Well, at 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values, and they'll help you create a plan that fits your goals and your purpose. The best part is that they'll show you how your current investments, what you have today, where you've invested your money, they'll show you how those investments stack up against your values. Visit 48financial.com/Todd to find out just exactly where those investments lie, where they line up. Do they support your values? Are they the exact opposite of your values? 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, helping you align your money with your mission. All right, let's look here. First and foremost, as I've, of course, been having internet problems here this morning. We have changed internet service providers. It's not a complete flip just yet, but we are in the process of changing internet providers here. And so hopefully these problems will be avoided completely as we move over. But as I mentioned off of the top of the program, President Trump had a big night politically last night as several states had their primaries. Now, I also talked a little bit about this yesterday. I talked about Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie is a Republican libertarian candidate from the state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And let's just look here. This is the the Epic Times website. Thomas Massie loses primary to Trump-backed Ed Gowrain. Gowrain, a former Navy SEAL, was bolstered by record spending in the Kentucky U.S. House GOP contest. Now, I believe this became the most expensive House primary in the history of our country. So this is Jeff Louderback. It's a good name, by the way. Louderback. Representative Thomas Massie, Republican Kentucky, lost his Republican primary on May 19th, that was yesterday, to former Navy SEAL Ed Gowrain. President Donald Trump had endorsed Gowrain as part of his effort to get Massie removed from Congress. Gowrain has tallied 54% of the votes compared to 45% for Massie when the Associated Press called the race at 7:54 p.m. Eastern Time. Massie's ousting underscores Republican voters' support for Trump. The Kentucky lawmaker, who's been at odds with Trump over several issues, joins Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican Louisiana. We talked about that yesterday. And several Indiana state senators, we've talked about that in recent days too, who were defeated by primary challengers backed by Trump in recent weeks. Now, this is, by the way, let me pause here. This is an uncommon thing. You know, when you are a sitting incumbent, it is fairly difficult, not impossible, of course, but fairly difficult for someone to come in and defeat you in the primary. It's also not incredibly common to see a president engage in the primary process like this president does. Now, as you know, the primary is the part of the election where political parties choose who's going to be on the general election ballot. And typically it's been considered politically wise to, say a president or anyone else in the Republican Party who's an elected official to kind of stay neutral in the process. That doesn't always happen. Of course, sometimes people endorse somebody in the primary, especially if it's an open seat, meaning if the person who is holding the seat has announced they're retiring or no longer, seeking to hold that office or whatever. It becomes, in those situations, someone might endorse a candidate. But it's pretty rare for the sitting president of the United States to get involved in the primary process. And But that, of course, you've got to break all the molds and all the rules and all the standards as far as what is traditionally acceptable when it comes to Trump, because Trump is going to do what Trump thinks he should do. And so Trump has been getting involved in a lot of these primaries. And he has a history now of taking out sitting incumbents in his own party in the primary process. Let's just sit there for just a second and let that sink in. The Republican Party is at a point, and by the way, I may not always agree specifically with maybe a candidate that Trump endorses or whatever. I'd have to go back and look. But in the vast majority of cases, and maybe all the cases, I would think that I agree. You know, some of these elections, they're not in my state. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on some of them. But it's a necessary process for the Republican Party. I've said for a long time, and I say it again, the Republican Party is in the midst of its own little mini civil war, cold civil war, as we are determining who's going to control the direction of the Republican Party. Now, I typically frame it as the conservative wing of the Republican Party versus the more rhino wing, the establishment Republican wing. And the way I differentiate it is that there are people who want to see this country return to our constitutional roots. They're concerned about the erosion of liberty. They're concerned about the size and scope of government, which seems to continually grow and grow and grow. They're concerned about high taxes. They're concerned about all sorts of things when it comes to turning from the foundation that our founders set forth and laid out for this great nation. And then there's the establishment or the rhino Republicans who really aren't concerned fundamentally about the direction of the country. In fact, oftentimes they lead us in the same direction the Democrats do, just at a slower pace. It's as though Democrats want to put the car, metaphorically, in full throttle, open it up wide open, and take the car right off the edge of the cliff as quickly as possible. And the rhino Republicans say, well, that's a little bit crazy. Let's at least go the speed limit. And they take the vehicle and head in the same direction. While conservatives are trying to say, look, we're heading in the wrong direction altogether. We need to turn around. We need to cut the size of government and do those things, restore liberty, fight big government, cut taxes, all that sort of stuff. And so there's a fight within the party. And you know, there's a battle within the battle, right? The larger battle, as we've talked about it here on this program quite a bit, is the cold civil war we're in the middle of as a nation for control of the direction of this nation. And so it's important that conservatives win the Republican battle, the control for the Republican Party, so that we are in a good position to fight this cold civil war that we're engaged in nationally, because we have even bigger fights and bigger differences of opinions there. And it's not even opinions anymore. We're talking about worldviews, clashing worldviews that are irreconcilable and cannot be they cannot be reconciled at all. These are diametrically opposed to one another. The Democrats' vision for America, fundamentally what they believe in, the direction that they want to take this country and so forth, is fundamentally at odds from just the most basic, the most fundamental, the most just at its core. There's nothing similar between these worldviews. So in order for us to win that battle, we have to have the best people, the people who have the values we have actually fighting in that larger cold civil war. Now, I would say Trump sees it a little bit differently. Trump does not look at the world through an ideological lens. I think Trump looks at the world very practically. I shared this yesterday, and of course you'll find echoes of this throughout this program when we talk about Trump. But Trump is not an ideological conservative. I would say he's practically a conservative. He finds himself agreeing with the conservatives in many cases, but it's from a practical perspective, not so much an ideological perspective. And so he views this as people who are obstructing what he's trying to do. And Thomas Massie, of course, is one of those candidates. Now, I shared on this program, there's a lot of things that I like about Thomas Massie, and that stays the same, even though he's fought with President Trump, who I support in major ways with what he's trying to do in this country. I still think that there's a lot of good that Thomas Massie brings. I think that he's got some principles that more people would need to adopt and at least consider, and hopefully when it comes to things like the defense of liberty and returning to constitutional roots. Of course, I think Thomas Massie's right in a lot of those instances, but I also think at the core of Trump's problem with Massie, that's just that Massie was obstructing what from Trump's perspective, obstructing what he wanted to get done. And from my perspective, again, I do like Massie in a lot of ways. I do think that Massie's wrong on a couple of key things, and I also think that he doesn't recognize fully what time it is in America. I don't want to see government get too big for its metaphorical britches. I want to see government return to her constitutional roots. That's what, of course, I want to see that. But there are instances, the Constitution certainly grants power. It's not as though, I think this is missed sometimes. It's not as though any exercise of government power is bad. Anytime government has power, we had better be paying attention so that it is not abused, misused, those sorts of things. But government power, there has to be a point in time where the branches of government have power. We have, this is the problem that we had with the founding of this nation. When we first, not the founding, don't misunderstand me, this is a wonderful nation, but our first document, our first attempt as a nation was to live under what is called the Articles of Confederation. And they realized that that document did not grant the federal government enough power to do what it needed to do. So they had to go back. They had the Constitutional Convention, and they created a document that gave the federal government a little bit more power. It still didn't grant it unlimited power. It still was very cautious to make sure that we maintained a limited government. Again, the balance they were trying to strike was you have to keep government as small as possible while allowing the government enough power to do what we've given it the consent to do. And that's the responsible conversation to have. And I just think that sometimes Massie is just against all exercises, even of legitimate constitutional power. And I understand. I empathize at a point because we have to be very cautious and make sure that these things are not abused and misused. And it's still, anytime you give something like the federal government power, you better just pay attention because it can be turned into a chaotic mess very quickly. I don't think Massie, I don't think he accepts some of the powers that the government has, the executive branch has, for example. So that doesn't make him bad. I think he's, like I said, good in a lot of ways, but he crossed Trump one too many times, and now he's out of his seat. Going back to this article really briefly, after his loss, Massie said he still had the support of young voters. people that want somebody that will go along to get along. I've never heard of that strategy, but that seems to be what the voters want, Massie said at a watch party in Hebron. But not the young voters. Gowrain, in his victory speech, vowed to carry the party's agenda in Congress and work closely with the president. We have a saying on the family farm that it's a contact sport, Gowrain said at the election night event in Covington, Kentucky. I can tell you that campaigning is one as well, folks. So, Trump wins. Gowrain won, but Trump, of course, excuse me. You know, I've still got this allergy or whatever it is. It's about gone. That one hit me quicker than I could get to the mute button. But this is a big victory for Trump and his agenda, of course, for Gowrain. But this, if Massie would have won, you know what the headlines would have been today. Trump is losing control of the Republican Party and all this sort of stuff. But, you know, this is, I think historically, we're going to find ourselves that this is, I don't know, I suppose things can change, but this is just so uncommon to see a sitting president of the United States go after members of his own party in the primary process if they have opposed him as incumbents. This is upset. This has upset people. In fact, Trump is supporting Ken Paxton. I saw Paxton in Texas. This has upset some Senate Republicans because of course you are that they really have a lot of respect for the hierarchy. Kind of the process. You earn your stripes. Sitting Senator Cornyn should be the one that you endorse. Why are you supporting someone on the outside? Of course, Trump just did this with Cassidy in Louisiana. This upsets the Senate. I mean, people like you and me, I would assume many of you anyway, we don't necessarily care about that. We want the decisions to be made that push this country in the right direction. So more to say about this, but as I look at the clock, it's time for me to wrap up the segment. Friends, there's a lot of confusion out there about Kratom. You've probably heard some of the headlines, and most of those headlines are based on synthetic junk that isn't real Kratom at all. Real Kratom is natural, it's tested, it's handled with care, and that's exactly what you get from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. Family-run company, partnered directly with farmers in Indonesia. Every batch is lab tested for purity. There's no chemicals, there's no fillers, there's no shortcuts. This is a trusted herbal option that's been used for generations, and it is a real alternative for people looking for something that doesn't come with a warning label a mile long. Once you do your research and decide this is the product for you, start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code ToddHuff to get 10% off your first order. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, and yes, my friends, time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. What we are witnessing is unprecedented indeed. It is remarkable just how, unprecedented this whole thing is. President Trump, of course, being involved in these primaries in such a critical way. And so there's actually a piece here at the New York Post. 9 key takeaways from election night in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Alabama, and Georgia. By the way, while I have time, I'm not going to be able to get into this very much, but I do want you to know this. Townhall.com, Matt Vespa says we have some huge news about South Carolina's redistricting effort. You might remember a week or two ago, we had told you that Republican senators, 5 of them, had blocked the state's General Assembly, the state legislature, from actually pursuing a new congressional map that would eliminate potentially. I always say potentially. People talk as though these are foregone conclusions. You don't know who's going to win elections until you have the vote. But they would adjust the districts to eliminate James Clyburn's district, the only Democrat district in the state of South Carolina. But according to what he's reporting here, I haven't seen this anywhere else. I've been following other things in the news, but it says here, we have some exciting news from the Palmetto State. The new map has been approved by the South Carolina State House. It now moves to the Senate, where we hope it passes. There was some drama during the first attempt. We talked about that here. Let's hope that doesn't happen again, he writes. The lower chamber worked into the early morning to pass this. Those South Carolina Democrats tried to run out the clock with hundreds of amendments attached to the bill. Republicans saw right through this, and they've passed it. They've passed it in the State House, so it goes back to the state Senate to see what happens there. So we will see. I'll keep you posted on that as well. This would net, in theory, Republicans one more congressional district if South Carolina Senate Republicans actually do this. But let's go to the article here at New York Post talking about the key takeaways from last night's midterm elections, or midterm primaries, I should say, in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Georgia. The first takeaway is what we've talked about here. Trump takes out Thomas Massie in Kentucky. We've talked about that. No need to go back into that. Massie hints he's not done yet. Massie, of course, at his concession speech, asked what happens in 2028. Oh, you want me to run Congress again? I don't know what you're talking about. All right, he said, you've made a compelling argument. You've spoken your piece, but I need a medical margarita now. We'll talk about it later. So he's left the door open there. A squad-backed candidate won in Pennsylvania. So this was a candidate that was endorsed by the likes of AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. This is reading from the article here, self-styled Democratic Socialist State Rep Chris Rabb won Pennsylvania's 3rd District Democratic primary after receiving endorsements from far-left squad members. You could tell, I talk about the conservative fight for control of the Republican Party. I talk about the cold Civil War from the perspective of conservatives, but the radical left is gaining some ground in some places. It's still not accepted nationally, but it wins in some places, including District 3 here in Pennsylvania. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who were among the few Republicans to speak out against Trump's attempt to overturn his 2020 loss in the Peach State, received middling support from voters in their gubernatorial bids, meaning they didn't do well. So, again, what is clear is that if you're a Republican and you oppose Trump, you had better proceed with caution. There's not many people who walk that path and come out victorious on the other side. Trump is a force to be reckoned with politically. Another takeaway here from the New York Post, Republicans will have to wait for their golden candidate to take down Senator John Ossoff. Representative Mike Collins, Republican Georgia, and former college football coach Derek Dooley will head to a runoff election in the GOP Senate primary in Georgia after neither candidate received 50% of the vote. Collins, at about 41%, was the top vote getter, while Dooley, who was endorsed by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp received about 30% support. Trump has not endorsed a candidate in the contest. Republican Buddy Carter was the odd man out, finishing in third place with 25%. So, again, some of these states, if you don't get 50% in your party's primary, you have to go to a runoff because they want at least 50% of the primary voters to support the candidate. Alabama Senate primaries also head to a runoff. Representative Barry Moore clinched a spot in the Republican runoff election for the Alabama Senate seat being vacated by Tommy Tuberville. Moore, who was endorsed by Trump, received just over 40% of the vote on Tuesday night's primary. The race for the second spot in the June 16th GOP runoff is still too close to call. The race to replace Mitch McConnell is now set. Representative Andy Barr, Republican, of course, from Kentucky, and former Democratic State Representative Charles Booker won their respective primaries in the state in the race to replace retiring Senator Mitch McConnell in the Senate. So Mitch McConnell, if you didn't know that, is retiring, and now we have Andy Barr and Charles Booker, who's a Democrat, running in the general election for that seat. Midterm races set in Pennsylvania's battleground House district. Midterm matchups in several Pennsylvania swing districts were finalized in Tuesday night's primary election. Pennsylvania's 1st congressional district, incumbent Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, that's the Republican, will take on Democrat Bob Harvey. The district went for former Vice President Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential election, but is rated a likely GOP seat by the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. Hey, look, you go through all these districts around the country. There's going to be some close races. There's going to be some blowouts. But when you do the final tally, it's in all likelihood going to be very close as to who controls the U.S. House. That's why what states like South Carolina are trying to do, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Missouri, Indiana, of course, missed our golden opportunity because, well, we had some wimpy leadership. That's still in the metaphorical crosshairs. Metaphorical as far as in the sights of Trump and conservatives who want to see other people like Rod Bray, my state senator, removed in the primary process in 2028. He's not up for election now. Who knows? Who knows what could happen in that? But people who are watching this, who are not on the ballot, who oppose Trump or whoever opposed redistricting efforts, should pay very close attention here, my friends, because this is not going away. This is not going away. This is something fundamental. Republicans have had enough. And if you've opposed redistricting or if you've opposed Trump's agenda, the conservative agenda, if you've opposed those things, you'd better be put on notice that you very well may face a strong primary challenge here. Friends, maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels more like juggling than just dealing with numbers. You've got tax planning, estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when family office services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services give you access to a coordinated team with advanced options, strategies, private equity, private credit, legal expertise, all those things under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for the future, and making sure your legacy stays strong for generations. If you're ready for that next level of support, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. Check them out today, fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. My friends, I have to take a quick time out. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I wanted to give this more time, but I ran out of time here. But I want to talk about this here, switching gears, not talking about the primary right now. This is at the Blaze. I've seen this elsewhere MS Now's Katy tour humiliates herself trying to shame Mike Johnson for attributing rights to God. There was an event on Sunday, the National Mall, for Rededicate 250. That was an event. I'm looking here at the at Blaze Media's website. That event aimed not only at preparing the United States for its 250th birthday with prayer, scripture, and song, but also recommitting America to uniting as one nation under God. So one of the speakers was Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, in his prayer, noted that God's mighty hand, this is a quote, God's mighty hand has been upon us, upon our nation, I should say, since the very beginning. That God is the source of America's many blessings, and that America is a nation premised on biblical and foundational principles. And so when Speaker Johnson talked about God being the source of the blessings, and in particular, God being the source of our liberties, which of course it is. I've told you on this program that this is something the left is coming for. This concept here, fundamental American concept, is not even American, it's just the truth. Our rights are given to us by our Creator. He created us to be free. He created us, from a biblical lens, in order for you not to be free, someone else has to engage in something, in a tyrannical sense. It's sinful to try to take away what God has given you, which is the ability to make your own, to choose, to decide. He made us in his image. We are a reflection, just a reflection. We're not little gods. We're made in his image. We're like him. There's a likeness between us and him. We, of course, have butchered this because we've become, we rebelled against him and sinned. But we're a reflection of him. We have a likeness to him, not in his perfection, but in the essence of who he is. He built that and programmed that into humanity, and we're a small reflection of that. And he wants us to be able to have dominion here over the earth. He's told us as much. He's given us the ability to choose and to engage in work. By the way, work is something that came before, not after the fall. Work is not a curse. It's something that we were created to do, to work in partnership and under the direction of God. So Katy Tur, it's like she's never even cracked open the Declaration of Independence, because she has this to say in a panel discussion on Sunday about Mike Johnson's comments.
What about this passage from Mike Johnson declaring that our rights do not derive from government? They come from you, our Creator and Heavenly Father. Is this him putting God over the Declaration of Independence?
Man, it's wild. He's literally quoting the Declaration of Independence. Is reading the Declaration of Independence putting God over the Declaration of Independence? By the way, news flash to Katy Tur, Christians do put God above the Declaration of Independence. We are being his children. Listen, I am an American through and through. I love this country. I'm a proud American. But I am a child of God. That is my identity. I find my identity in him. I'm an American. I love being American. I'm a Huff. I love being a Huff. I'm a talk show host. I love being a talk show host. But those are more things that I do. Some of those things are part of the overall identity, helps you understand who you are, I guess. But my identity, my final identity, fundamentally is in Christ. And I will serve him over whatever a group of people in Washington, D.C. tell me to do. If they come together and say, I can't do this, I've just got a news flash again for Katy Tour and for the people who don't understand this. I'm not complying. Here's a response from one of the people on the panel.
Okay.
Well, I actually think that idea is not wholly uncommon. I mean, the idea
No kidding.
that we have certain inalienable rights that come from God can be read in a fairly benign way, which
McKay
is basically
Coppins.
that we have innate human rights that our Constitution and our government, our democratic government, are meant to codify, right? That idea is not totally abnormal. I think that the thing
It's a
that,
foundational component of the
might alarm
founding
some
of this
people
nation.
is some of the rhetoric that we heard at this rally that we are in a spiritual battle, right?
Oh, we are that too.
The forces of good and evil are at work here, and that partisan politics is injected directly into the spiritual biblical rhetoric.
I got to pause that. I'm out of time. Hold on. I just don't have time to talk about this. Let me say this. Partisan politics have not been injected into the spiritual. I would say the spiritual has been injected into our politics, my friends, and we cannot allow this to continue. I got it. Just out of time. So much more I wanted to say about it. That's why I wanted to give myself more time, but I had to talk about the midterm primaries, but I got to run. SDG.